Right, hey guys, it's Joshua J here. I want to take you through a very specific workflow that includes Blender and Photoshop, specifically for stylized artwork. So this can be used in asset design, vehicle design, structure design, mostly also environment design. And yeah, it's a very specific workflow and specific techniques that I've sort of figured out, and I would love it if you guys sort of found out which parts of it you liked, and then maybe apply it to your own artwork. Just to be clear, this is not for realistic artwork, so it's not for realistic design work coming out of Blender. So we're not going to be adding textures, we are not going to be adding color or material or anything in Blender. It's just specifically to get the shapes, get the selections, bring them into Photoshop, and how to just a workflow that uses both Blender and Photoshop, but also easy to go back and forth between the two. Alright, so I'm going to take you through my workflow here, and I'm just going to use this ship as an example on how I sort of started this and how Blender was incredibly useful to me. And I'll show you the exact exports that are needed. So I haven't done any painting work here. The whole reason I'm showing you guys this is so that you can get to a point where you can start painting very easily. And if I just turn on the layers that I've exported here, we can see that we've got a really good starting point to paint over. So you can see I've done no painting here. All I've done is built this in Blender. I didn't even do the line work. I just laid in the flat colors, and I'll explain to you a little bit later on why adding in the flat colors yourself for specifically stylized artwork is really helpful. So this is where we are at, and this is where Blender served up until this point. And now that everything is in place, it's very easy to now go and start painting. So that's the point that I'm getting to, is Blender can save you a heck of a lot of time, and I'll also show you how user-friendly it is. And I'll show you exactly how my layers are set up. So let's just go over right from the beginning. So this boat here I built in Blender. So built this boat from scratch in Blender. I will put out a time lapse, literally how I went about building it. I also just want to point out a few things. So so it depends what you want, but we can use a lot of modifiers in Blender, but I placed these irregularly and manually, so that I didn't want it to use an array modifier because I thought it would be too repetitive. Also bearing in mind these boxes here, a few of these elements I didn't actually make, so I downloaded these boxes here. The barrels I downloaded online. We can use Turbo Squid, Blend Swap, Free 3D, CG Trader. Same thing with these guys here. So yeah, I also downloaded this banister here, and what I did was took it and picked it apart to use certain elements. So I reused these a lot, and I kind of used them throughout the design so that it was consistent. Same thing with this guy here. I would like split them apart and reused certain elements, but I didn't build the thing from scratch. Also, this boat I built before. So the reason I'm telling you this is because it's important to be smart when you're working. So reusing elements that you've already built, there's no point in building it twice. That's the important part. So if you use something and you want to reuse it, that's totally fine. Also remember, this is a starting point, so this is a conversation starter. I've got the symmetry tool going on here. So once you have your model, also just to note, when we're in Blender, it's important to use Blender for structural elements and complex perspective. With more organic elements, rather just paint it in Photoshop. You're going to save yourself a lot of time, and you'll find you'll end up wasting more time if you try and build organic elements in Blender, because you might as well just paint them. So the thing I want to point out is setting up your camera. So once you've set up your camera view, so you set it up by clicking camera to view, and you can maneuver it. once you have chosen your angle, this is the most important part of this video, do not change the where your camera is and the angle of your camera. Don't change anything. Once this is checked, if I move now, then I'm pretty much screwed, because then I can't get my exports exactly in line. Okay, so uncheck that. Then when you move around, nothing, your camera doesn't move. When you're locked into this view, do not change anything. The reason why that's important is because when we render things out, we want them to be exactly over line with each other. So the first thing I want to show you here is, if I go into my process of this ship, I want to just show you, once it's been built, I want to show you, the first thing we need to export is the form. Okay, so we want to export the actual form so we can draw over it. We need to understand the form. So we do that by going to view, render viewport image, and I'll get this here. And then you'll go image, save as, call it whatever you want, and save it where you want to. And then you have the form. Okay, so that is what this is here. So now I have my form pass of this. Just bearing in mind, if I've rendered, I've turned on transparency. So if you turn on transparency when you render, then you get a PNG with no background. That's important to have. So yeah, okay. And then the next thing I want to show you that we can render is, if I go to line, this is the line work that Blender generated. So I didn't do any of this line work. Blender calculated this for me. So I'm just going to show you how to set this up, and you can play around with the settings yourself. Remember I said there's a starting point. It's not perfect. You can see there's little blemishes, and in Photoshop we'll go and tweak this and make sure it's, you know, it's on point. But this is a starting point. It's an amazing starting point. Okay, so we're in Blender here. Remember, do not change the camera angle. I can't stress that enough. So what we want to do is we want to go to our render tab here, and where it says freestyle, I want you to turn that on. Okay, so now it's on. And now if we go into our passes, we also click freestyle, and we set this to as render pass. So if I hit that to as render pass, if I open my compositor tab here and I say use nodes, you'll notice if I turn it on and off, if I turn this on and off, then it's popping on and off here. So I want to unplug this, and I want to plug this freestyle into image. So that means it's going to render just the lines. Okay, once we have that selected, the freestyle line set, we want to drop that down, and I want you to just look at these and check these borders. Check these options here. So silhouette, border, crease, edge mark here, and then in this tab here, the freestyle line set, if we go into strokes and we go into thickness, I clicked add modifier and I clicked a noise modifier. So now I've got a noise modifier on my lines, which means that I'm going to get this wobbly effect. I'm not going to get a hard straight line. It's going to be a more inky sort of effect. So that's the reason why we changed that. I dialed mine down way less. If you render yours and it looks very, very jaggedy, then you'll need to dial down the influence. So I'm just going to put this very low for now. And if I go into here and I turn this, let's say I turn this far up and I render now, it's obviously going to take a while to render everything. But you'll see that the lines aren't, they're not completely perfect and straight. So they've got some sort of wobble to it. So you'll see this is very wobbly, and I don't want that. I don't want it to be too wobbly. So mine, I put this at a pretty low number, the influence, just to make sure it's not that wobbly. And then another important thing is in your freestyle line, once you've checked this box here, also dial this down, because if it's too high, your lines are going to be super thick. And then, so we want to play around with the thickness of the lines. So once you have that, the same way that you saved your form pass, I want you to save your line pass. So now this is the line work that Blender generated for me. Okay, another important one is, this is also incredibly important. So I've got a light 01 and a shadow 01. So I've rendered this out here. This is going to be, I'm going to end up turning this to black and white and multiply in Photoshop, and that's going to give me the separation between my light and my dark. Probably Eevee does it a lot better. So the way we set this up is we go into Photoshop, wherever our light is. So here's my light. If I click this, I want you to check sun, and I want you to crank this up to like 2000 and change it to Eevee. The reason why we do that, while we make it so high, is to get a really, like a super high contrast. So you can see on my screen now, I've got like a very high contrast between my light areas and my dark areas. That's going to be really important later, because I want to have control over my light areas and my shadow areas, so that I can separate my warms and cools. My warms are going to be in the light, and then cools are going to be in the shadow, or vice versa, whatever, you know, whatever's your preference. So in Eevee, it's really easy to render this because it's low and it doesn't take a lot of computations. So you know, it's dialed down. You're obviously, when you guys are rendering, I want you to just turn up your percentage here to maybe like 400% so that you get a really crisp render. But for the purpose of this demonstration, it's going to be low. So I will save this the same way that I've saved it here, you know, save, and then I'll get something that looks like this. Remember, I still haven't changed my camera angle. I need this because I'm going to go in Photoshop and separate it out. Okay. The next one I want you to render is this here. So that's going to be from cycles. That'll give me my ambient occlusion. So if I turn this to cycles here, and it's obviously going to take quite a while. When you're in cycles, you want to turn your light to 20, not like 200,000, because cycles interacts the light differently with your object than what Eevee does. So with that being said, that, you know, it'll obviously take some time to render, but this is sort of what you'll get. I've got denoise selected, so it's not going to make like a lot of noisy pixel art. And the same way I've rendered that, I will get something that looks like this. Okay, and I'll change the levels in Photoshop. That's going to give me my ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion, those are the areas with no light. So these like crevices here that you won't get in Eevee. That's why both are important. The last one I want you to render is a clown pass. This is going to be really important because when we're in Photoshop, to make selections of particular objects, it's really handy to have a clown pass, because when you use your magic wand and you just select a color, it selects the whole area, so you have a lot more control. So the way you do that is you change your render engine to workbench, you go to matte caps, and you change this to random, and yeah, now you have a random color selection. And then if I go down to color management and I say use curves and I check that down, if I move this around, I'm going to get a more contrasty or more saturated version of my colors, and that's completely up to you. In fact, probably better to change this to flat. Way better to change it to flat, rather use flat. Because now if I move this around, the thing you're looking for here is a big contrasting difference between all the colors in your scene. And then you go viewport render image, and I'll save that out and I'll get something like this. Once I have all of these, then leave Blender. We don't want to stay in Blender forever. We want to use it to our best advantage. Okay, so sorry, also just one thing to mention, I plugged this freestyle into the image. If you want to render anything else that's not freestyle line, you need to unplug that and plug in image to image. Then all the alterations you've done when you render it, it'll render exactly what you're looking for. So just make sure your image is plugged into image, except when you're rendering your line art, then it's freestyle plugged into image. Okay, that's important. Okay, now we leave Blender, we go into Photoshop. All right, so this is what we have here. So the important part is, I'm actually just going to show you exactly how I did this. I want you to select your clown pass, form pass, your line, your light, which is your ambient occlusion from cycles, and your EV, and you drag and drop them in here. They're going to be at different percentage sizes, so you're going to have to resize them to be exactly over top each other. That's the important part here, that it has to be like pixel to pixel exactly. So once I have these, I'm going to rasterize these layers here, rasterize, and I'm going to scale them down to be, you know, to be exactly. I'm not going to do it here because it might, you know, it's going to take too much time, but I need this lineup to be exactly on par. Okay, so what do we got here? There we go. Okay, so let's say, for example, these are all lined up and they're working out. The next thing we want to do is take our ambient occlusion. I'm hitting Control L, and I want to get this as contrasty as possible. So I'm looking for my ambient occlusion. I'm looking for the areas of like the crevices. Okay, so something like that. Changing it to black and white, and hit OK. And now I want to go select color range, color dab on the white, delete the white, keep deleting the white. Okay, so I'll change this to, I'll go Control U, colorize, and I want this to be blue because my dark areas I want to be blue. Okay, so I've got a blue sort of a thing going there, and then I change that to multiply. Okay, the next thing, so that's my line art. I have full control over this. Okay, the next thing is this EV export. I also want to go Control L, make this really extreme. Okay, so just the darks and the lights. Change that to black and white. And now if I go select color range, select the black, go OK, hit Control X, and then Control Shift V to paste in place. That means I now have control over my shadows and I have control over my lights. So I want to change my lights. Remember, I want a general color going on. So I'm going to change this color to, let's use an orange, okay, because it's sunlight. Okay, so I've got full control over that. Then I want to change this dark to, sorry, the shadows to blue. So let's say I want to use that blue. Then I'll change that to multiply, change that to overlay, and now these are going to affect my flat colors that I'm going to put in myself. Okay, so this is where I'm at right now. Okay, so let's move these away for a second. Okay, so this is your render. I also want to just point something out here. I've started with this line art, and then you can see I've gone in and I've added blemishes. I've made it a little bit more organic. So the important part is that it's a starting point. I don't want this to be the end thing. So I've got these masks here. You know, I've added the organic elements like the sails, you know, or maybe ropes. That's going to be really counterintuitive to do in Blender. You know, I've fixed up certain blemishes that weren't working. You know, added these snake dudes on the front that my client wanted. So, you know, patterns, things like that, don't add that in Blender, rather add this in Photoshop. But I'm working with this. So all of this little, you know, this line art that's here, I got auto generated, now I'm working with it. So honestly, this has saved me probably about 3 hours. Okay, once I have that, then at the bottom, I'm putting in my own flat colors. That's another important part that I can't stress enough. So now underneath this line art layer, then we have a layer that's without flats. So that's me adding in flat color manually. You know, adding in where the flat colors are. And now because I've exported my shadow area and my light area, that means I have full control over that. So these areas here, basically this same, you know, this what I did here where I changed my highlights to overlay and the shadows to multiply, I have control over that. So now on top of my flat colors here, I'm putting, if I turn on my shadow layer, you'll notice it's adding this lovely drop shadow that I didn't do. Blender calculated all of that for me that I would have had to manually do before. if I turn this on and off, this is my, sorry, if I turn this on and off, this is my light layer. Okay, so you'll see I've got my light area and I've changed it to, I've got like a orange, and it's affecting the flat colors beneath it. Okay, so Blender's gotten me up to here, like this is how far it's gotten. So this, I might need to still tweak the, the settings a little bit, but this would be my ambient occlusion layer. So you can see how it's working out the crevices for me. Okay, yeah, and that's honestly all you really need. And now at this point, now where I am at right now, this is where I start painting. So, for me at least, this is probably 3 hours in and I'm already this far. Honestly, like this is virtually done. It just needs like painting over top of it. So this is where you start, this is where we really want to get to as artists, is the part that we start painting. And this, using Blender is a really quick way to get there. So if we use Blender, cleverly, then it can really help us. I also just want to show you the clown pass layer that I have here at top. So now I just want to show you how this works. So if I hit W and I select here, notice how it's selecting individual elements. If I didn't export my clown pass layer, then it wouldn't be able to select these. So if I just want to edit this carpet on the floor, I can select it here by hitting W, turning it off, going back to my color flats layer, and maybe I want to, maybe I want to change the color of this, and maybe I want it to be like, maybe I want it to be white. Then I'm painting on my color layer just there, so it's really easy to get those selections. Whereas before, let's say I didn't do that, I would have to go and manually go and like make sure I'm outlining this here, avoiding like taking that out, that sort of stuff. Whereas if I got my clown pass layer, I can just W, select that, turn it off, go back to my color flats, paint it in, bam, deselect. That was like, oh, saved myself a lot of time. So this is really cool for saving you a lot of time. Might work for you, might not, but it's up to you. But I just really felt like this was valuable. So now I'm glad I showed you where I'm at here, because this is kind of where I would start painting now. So I'm maybe 2 or 3 hours in, whereas before this would be like 5 or 6 hours in, so I've saved myself a lot of time. I want to just show you how this has kind of worked with other elements. So same thing here, I built a Blender model, exported like a line set going from here, added like my flat colors underneath it. So I've got nice color variety in here. So when you're adding your flats, you can really focus on your color variety, nice diverse colors. Then I've slowly started like building things up. These I added in 2D, so I used symmetry tool, projected those onto the windows, and then duplicated it. So yeah, started adding contrast, added like a darker color burn layer here, and then it sort of lands up like that. So then I started painting. So from this point here, I can start painting. So you can see that scene started out there. So we've got form, line, flats in Photoshop. So from here to here, I've moved into Photoshop already. And now I've added my nice lighting layers that I exported and then could paint. And this was super quick. So yeah, I just thought it was really important to show this, and I hope you guys will be able to use it.